universe of possibilities. And hope. Hope is rebellion.
Samson, of the tribe of Dan, chosen by the living God, gifted with his power to be his hand of vengeance.
Great to have you guys here today. My name's Ken, and I'm part of the teaching team at Creekside, and we are into our second week, our middle week of our series called Samson, right? Samson. And this is a great series. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about a little phrase that you and I use all the time, just simply two words, and those two words are if only. If only. Can you say that with me, please? If only. If only is a statement that we make about something that happened in the past where we experience regret about that thing that happened in the past. It may be that we did something or didn't do something or said something or didn't say something, and we regret the fact that we did not do that. And it happens to us, it can happen in all kinds of different ways, right? I mean, we'll get home back to our room after writing an exam and we'll say, if only I'd studied more for that exam. Or maybe we look in the rearview mirror and we see these blue lights flashing behind us and a little siren sound, and we say, if only I'd kept my foot off the gas. Or maybe we just say something really, really dumb and we turn around and say, if only I hadn't said that, right? If only. We've all said it. We're all going to say it. It's part of who we are. So I was 17 years of age and I was working at the grocery store part-time while still at school. And my sister and her boyfriend had borrowed my car. It was Halloween and it was 10 o'clock at night, and they came to pick me up because that's when the grocery store shut down. And so they came with my car to pick me up. They'd borrowed my car for that day. And when I got into the car, as soon as I sat down in the car, my sister said, Kenny, we got this really cool idea. I've got a big jacket that's way too big for you. We've got these work boots as well, and we got this full head mask of a super ugly old man. And we thought it'd be really neat if you put those on and went up to visit your girlfriend, who happens to be Carol, who's presently my wife. If you visit her with this outfit on and just go trick or treat, and it'll be really cool for her to kind of go, aha, I think it'll be a lot of fun. And I said to them, it's like late at night. I don't really feel like getting all dressed up and wandering over there, and I don't think it would be a lot of fun. But they kept after me and after me and after me. And finally I said, okay. So I put the big coat on, big trench coat, and these big oversized boots, and this head mask, this full rubber head mask right over my head of a really super ugly old man. And I went to her, they drove me over to her street. They had to park a few blocks away because there was a lot of construction. In fact, her street was completely under construction. There were bulldozers, big digger machines, there was the orange fencing, there were piles of stuff and culverts and everything there. So they let me off, and I thought, I'm not just going to walk up and knock on her door. That would be too simple, too easy. She'll figure out who I am. So I got to work this up a little bit. So I hunched my back up and kind of dragged one of my feet, and I made this real growling sound up and down the street. So I made my way all the way up her street. I got there, and I would see little pieces of garbage. So I'd pick them up and pile them in one spot, and I wandered around in circles aimlessly like some crazy man, just walking around like that. And nothing was happening. Nobody came to the door of her house and said, aha, I know who it is, and nothing like that happened. But I remember while I'm walking around sweating like crazy in this stupid rubber mask, that there's these people coming down the street, and they saw me, and they covered their hands over their mouths and ran to the other side of the road and got by me real quickly, watching me all the while. I thought, well, that's kind of weird. And then there's some adults having this Halloween party in one of the houses on her street, and the one guy opened up the door and said, hey, come on up here, join the party. So I went to my kind of thing and went up the steps, got on the top step of the house, and the door slammed shut, the lights went off, and everything went dead quiet. And I thought, wow, this is kind of cool. Wandered around for a little bit more, and I thought, this is crazy. I'm going back. I'm not going to go to Carol's door. I'm just going to head back and meet my sister. So I kept up in character, dragging my foot along, and went down. And when I was like just a little short distance from my car, they started up the car as if to take off on me. So I realized they're going to go without me. So I pulled the head mask off, and they realized, oh, it's Ken, They said, man, you freaked us out. I said, you gave me the costume. Like, how can I freak you out, So I said, I just want to go home. I'm done with this. I don't want to do this anymore. And they said, no, go back. This was really good. Go back. Do something different. So I thought, oh, man. So I went, put the outfit back on again and went back up her street. And finally, after walking around, picking up more garbage and dumping it, I decided to just go sit down on her front porch. So I went, sat down on her front porch, pulled this head mask off, and immediately her cat, who hated me, jumped up on my lap. And then the front door opened, and she has a big brother, like her younger brother's really quite big, and he opens up the door, takes one look at me sitting on this chair and says, "Oh no, it's you, T." And he goes back in the house. The door opens up a little bit later, it's her father. She goes, "Oh no, it's you. I thought you were some like guy on drugs and you were like really dangerous. I called the police on you." So her house is up on this hill. You can see a lot of Brantford from her house, and I'm looking over to the right, and I can see these two patrol cars, lights flashing, whipping through the streets. They come up the street where her house is. They're zipping around all the bulldozers in the dirt. They come to a screeching halt in front of her house. These four big guys get out, all dressed with black outfits on. One's got a machine gun. One's got nunchucks. One's got a machete, one's got, baseball bat, and I'm freaking out at this particular moment. Her dad's freaking out, the cat is freaking out, everybody's freaking out, and they come to the front of the house, and her dad, he's a really quiet man, he starts stuttering because he doesn't know what to say, and he's trying to explain to the police officer, "No, you actually know this guy, he's kind of normal, but he kind of did this, and we're sorry," and the police officer comes over and has a little chat with me about things. And I just started dating Carol, so I'm feeling really kind of stupid at this particular moment. At the same time, kind of, this is cool, and all of that's going on. And finally, I just said, "Look, I got to go." And I think she was actually taking a shower the whole time and didn't even know I was there, which is really kind of cool. So I just go, and I walk back, and I get to the car and take my stuff off. My sister says, "Hey, did you see those two police cars zip by? Wasn't that cool?" I said, "Yeah, I saw them, I did." But I can remember saying something like this to her: "If only I'd just gone home after work, if only." And I think for a lot of us, we can look back on our lives, we can do the if only about goofy things, funny things, humorous things that we've done. But sometimes we say if only, and it's really about something very, very serious, right? If only I hadn't said that, maybe that person would still be my friend. If only I hadn't acted that way, maybe my marriage would still be together. If only I hadn't done that, maybe my kids would talk to me. If only I hadn't acted that way, maybe I would be financially in much better shape instead of this swirling black hole of debt I'm in. If only. If only. If you look back 3,000 years to a city called Gaza in the middle of Israel, you're going to see a man in the middle of the city standing with his hands on this pole, and the pole extends to a big round disc-shaped stone. And he's going round and round and round this stone. And you look at him and you notice that his hair is kind of really poorly cut, very short. His beard has been kind of clipped off. But what strikes you most of all is that he has no eyes. His eyes are gone. Sockets are just there. And he's just going around in this circle, and his people are spitting at him and throwing things at him and mocking him. You can hear him say over and over again as he goes around and around and around, "If only, if only, if only, if only." Now, you know what his name is, right? His name is Samson, and he's the life that we are looking at during this 3-week series. Samson. Samson's life is told for us in Judges chapter 13, 14, 15, and 16. He has 4 chapters on his life, which is a lot of space for a judge. There were 14 judges. He was only one of them. Some judges only get a mere sentence of their life history. He gets 4 chapters. But the reason that he gets these 4 chapters is obviously because of the place he played. But what's fascinating about the account of his life is that it appears when you look at Samson's life and the record of his life, that his life teaches us more about how not to live than it teaches us about how to live. Here is a negative example about how not to live. Here's a man whose life is basically given to us to say to us, don't live like Samson. It's a little startling. If you remember Samson, I already mentioned Samson was a judge. There were about 14 judges, and they led Israel spiritually, civilly, and militarily for about 340 years. After the time of Joshua leading the children of Israel across the Jordan River into the Promised Land, until the first monarchy under King Saul. So during this space of time, there were these judges. The judges were not linear, they did not fill every gap in time. They would show up only when there was an oppressor who God had allowed to oppress Israel because Israel was disobedient to God. And the judges are people like Gideon and Deborah and Shamgar and Eli and Abdon. And of course, then we have Samson. Samson was a judge, and sometimes there were more than one judge. We believe that during the time Samson was a judge, that also Samuel, who's probably the greatest of the judges, was also involved in leading and helping the nation as well. So Samson was a judge. Samson was also a Nazarite, which is the title of someone who has taken a vow, a special vow of commitment to God. Nazarites were required not to do three things. One of them was they weren't allowed to touch a dead body, primarily, I believe it was a dead human body, that they were not allowed to drink eat grapes or drink wine or alcohol of any kind, and thirdly, they were not allowed to cut their hair. Most Nazarite vows are a short period of time. Samson's vow was from his birth, his conception actually, all the way, even before he's told, his mom is told that she needs to act in certain ways. So here he is in the womb, and his vow goes for the whole of his life. It's very unusual. The third truth about Samson was not only that he was a judge and a Nazarite, but thirdly, that he was given supernatural strength. Now, I personally don't believe that by looking at him you would say, this is, wow, he could be Mr. Universe. I don't think that's necessarily true. And even if he was buff, his strength was way beyond that of any human being, no matter how powerful they can be. And let me suggest to you that I believe that the strength that he has was not just that he was physically powerful, but I believe he could jump very high. I believe he could run very fast. I believe he was extremely agile. It was just all of the physical dimensions of this man. He was like a superhero way back then. This is what Samson had. And you look at his life and you see his life and you see all of this incredible potential. And yet what I see is a man who's a mix of incredible potential and incredible weaknesses as well. And I think about you and me, and I want to say to you and me, I need to say to you and me, we also have incredible potential. You have within you gifts. You have the Holy Spirit of God if you are a child of God, if you're a follower of Jesus. You have these experiences. You have a context in which you live that God wants to leverage for his glory. You have incredible potential to glorify God. Think about that. And to do things for the good of other people that God has given and entrusted to you. Even in your uniqueness of who you are. Maybe you're not an upfront person. Doesn't matter. You have an incredible potential. But you also have incredible potential for weaknesses. Incredible potential to fall and to stumble. And what we looked at last Sunday was these three attitudes or motivations or perspectives that Samson had that got him into a lot of trouble. You remember one of the things he had was a real struggle with lust. He had this thing where he would say, I want it, I want it, I want it. And in his particular case, he had this thing for women. He was a he-man with a she weakness. He would look at women. He would be in a lot of trouble around women. We'll talk a little bit about it today. This was something that was a very weak part of his life. He kept saying, I want it, I want it, I want it. But it doesn't necessarily happen to be lust that's the problem here. Any kind of craving or pining after something that you want, that God would say to you, no, I don't want you to have that. And you want it, you want it, you want it. It could be money, it could be position, it could be possessions, it could be a whole bunch of things. If your life is driven by, I want it, I want it, I want it, without God in the picture, you're in a dangerous place. The second thing that we saw from him last week is that this idea of entitlement. Samson lived his life by saying, I'm entitled to it, I deserve it. And as a man who's a leader who often would experience, I'm confident, some loneliness, high expectations by the people, there might have been times when he goes, I'm done with all this. I've worked really hard. I've sacrificed myself for them. I deserve something. And even if I color outside the lines, even if I step beyond the no trespassing sign, I think it's okay for me because I deserve it. And the third attitude that he had was pride, where he said, I can handle it. I can handle it. I can go that far and not get burned. I can drink a little bit of that poison and not get sick. I can handle it. I can handle it. And so he would step outside of where God would want him to be, believing that he could handle it, that it was very easy for him to get back again. And these three attitudes, I want it, I deserve it, I can handle it, are dangerous because they push us or take us into places where we get into deep, deep trouble. And you're going to see that that's what happens to him. In fact, I believe that the I want it, and I don't care what God says, I deserve it, doesn't matter if I step beyond where I should, I can handle it, I'm okay, I can get out of this kind of attitude, brings us to a place where we simply say, if only I hadn't done that. If only I hadn't done that. And that's one of the things that I hear in Samson's voice as he's grinding the grain in the city of Gaza all these years for all these weeks and months and so on, as people mock him. I want it. I deserve it. I can handle it. And this is where it's taken him. Well, last Sunday we looked at chapters 13 and 14. And this morning I want to look at chapters 15 and part of the way through chapter 16. And let me just remind you of where we've been. So, or actually, let me just kind of jump right in at the end of chapter 14, the beginning of chapter 15. If you want to read chapter 13 and 14 to catch up, or if you want to watch the teaching online from last Sunday, you can do that on our website. But let me just tell you very basically what's happening when you come to chapter 15 of the book of Judges, okay? Judges chapter 15. Samson was involved in a wedding to this girl he saw who was a Philistine that he wanted. And there's some conversation around whether he's actually married to her or sort of married to her or not married to her at all. But the text talks about her as his wife. Whatever the case might be, it's not the kind of marriage that we would understand it to be. I would argue maybe he's partly married to her, but not completely. But he has been mad. Remember he got ticked off at the end of chapter 14 last week? And in the middle of his wedding event, he runs away. He just disappears. Wedding's kind of off as far as he's concerned, or certainly the fullness of it. He comes back at the beginning of chapter 15 to be with her. It might have been weeks or months later. And her father says to him, the bride's father says, well, you disappeared. We didn't know you were coming back, so we gave her to somebody else. She's married to another guy now. And Samson's a little ticked. He wants it, and he can't have it. So guess what happens? Anger really rises up in him, and he does this crazy, wild thing. He goes and he captures 300 foxes, or jackals is another way to translate that term. These 300 animals, and he takes them in groups of 2 each. He ties their tails with a rope between them, and in the middle of this, he ties a bit of a firebomb. And we don't know if he traps them or he's just fast and he runs and catches them. Doesn't really matter. He releases these animals with this firebomb lit in its harvest time. It's fall. It's like when they're about to gather the harvest into their fields, the Philistine fields, and into the olive groves. And these animals run with this fire through these fields and light all this stuff on fire, burn up their crops, burn up their olive groves. And the Philistines they don't know what's happened. What's going on here? What's going on here? And so they find out that Samson's the one who did it because of his anger. And they realize that he's related to this gal who he wanted to marry, and that's where his anger is. And so to punish him, they go and burn her and her family. And when Samson finds out about that, he gets into a fight with a bunch of Philistines and kills them. And then he runs away and settles in a cave in the land of Israel, a special cave that he just decides to stay in. He doesn't want to go home, whatever the case might be. He just feels he needs to do that. Well, the Philistines decide that they're going to go after him. So the text tells us that they gathered together an army, and we believe it would have been at least 4,000 to 5,000 Philistines are going after this one man. Okay, so they march into Israel, and they say to the Israelites, we want Samson, your judge. And the Israelites go, we think he's in a cave like over there. You can go ahead and talk to him. And they go, no, we want you to get him and bring him to us. So 3,000 Israelites come together to talk to Samson, okay? You think they're afraid of this guy? 3,000 of them go, and they say to Samson, the Philistines, they're over there, and they really want you, and remember, we're kind of related. would you mind kind of going, and we need to turn you in, and they want us to tie you up with brand new ropes to make sure that they hold you. Will you be willing to do that? And Samson says to them, I will do that as long as you promise not to kill me. And they say, we promise we won't do that. And some believe that the reason he said don't kill me is because I'll have to break the ropes and kill you. And he doesn't want to kill his own family, right? So they tie him up, and they present him toward the Philistines, bring him before the Philistines. And the text says that the Philistines, when they saw Samson walking toward them with these ropes around his wrists, they let out a big yell, and they start charging toward him. And the text says he breaks the ropes like they're threads and finds a donkey and grabs its jawbone, tears it out of the donkey, and begins to attack them. And it seems there's a lot of confusion going on when this guy's running. Imagine this guy running towards 4,000 trained soldiers by himself. Well, this is William Wallace in steroids. Okay, so they're freaking out at this particular moment, and it appears that they start clustering in groups to run away, tripping over themselves. And he gets them in groups, and he starts killing them in these groups to the point where he kills somewhere around 1,000 Philistines. It's just crazy what he does. And it's awful, and it's ugly. At the end of it, he's so thirsty, he calls out to God, I'm going to die from thirst, and God opens up the ground, and water comes out, he drinks it, he names that a specific place. And that's where you come to the end of chapter 15. Samson has performed all these incredible things. And between chapter 15 now and chapter 16, we have a gap of about 18 years, okay? So we do not know what happened during those 18 years. My personal feeling is, and you can take it for what it's worth nothing, but it's my feeling. My personal feeling is that during that time, Samson is every once in a while showing up to remind the Philistines, I'm here, guys. You remember what's going on, right? Normally what judges would do is they would raise up an army to fight the oppressors, whether it was the Ammonites or the Jebusites or the Philistines or whatever. But Samson doesn't do that. He is an army, okay, by himself. He's better than any army, because here's the deal. You get an army, you got to recruit, you got to train, you got to figure out logistics of travel, and you got to provide food, you got to make sure you can move your equipment, you got to lay down plans. This guy just does it on his own. Gets up one morning and goes, I think I'll go after some Philistines. So they're like freaked out about this, right? So they back away from oppressing Israel. And for these 18 years, I'm sure that sometimes they would have went, those stories about Samson can't be true. And he pulls off something and they go, those stories about Samson are true. And so they back away from him, and I believe for that 18 years do that. Now we come to chapter 16, which is, in my opinion, one of the saddest chapters in the Bible. Because this man with great potential, this grand man who's been gifted in so many ways by God, is going to go down, 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 so that you come to that spot where at the end of his life, he's standing there grinding grain, being mocked by people, saying, if only, if only, if only, if only. I want it. I deserve it. I can handle it, has led him to this place. And in chapter 16, he really goes down in a hurry. And I want to point out two actions that I believe, or attitudes that happen inside of him that take him to this place. And it's not a shocker that he gets there. It's just so sad that he keeps going down, 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 down. So chapter 16 and verse 1, here's what happens. And I want to say that the first thing that I see him doing, by the way, is abusing the grace of God. The first thing he's going to do, in my opinion, is abuse the grace of God. Let me tell you what the grace of God is. It's God's goodness, it's God's kindness, it's God's blessing in our lives. To abuse it is to, God's blessed me, but I'm going to do my own thing anyway. God's blessed me, but I'm not going to pay any attention to him. Here's a man who has all these blessings, but he says, I can sin, I can do wrong, and God will just wink at it, he's not going to hurt me. And because he doesn't understand or get a handle on the fact of this is God's grace, God hasn't changed his mind, God hasn't changed the rules of the game, he gets himself into big trouble. So here's what we read in chapter 16, verse 1. One day Samson went to Gaza where he saw a prostitute. Now that word saw shows up a number of times, right? If you remember last week, we talked about the fact that he saw Miss Philistine and he fell in love with her, and he says to his dad, I want to marry her, and he never even talked to her. Okay, this guy's got it really, really bad here. There's something about seeing that really gets him into trouble. And I want to talk for a minute about men's brains. Can we do that? You guys good with that? They do have them. You know that a man's brain is physically different from a woman's brain, right? And not only is it true that they're physically different, there is some chemical, hormonal differences as well between a man's brain and a woman's brain. Shanti Feldhahn writes about this difference, and she says that one of the things that's interesting about the difference between men and women is that men tend to sort of process life visually, and she argues, and I know this is just some general statements here, she says women tend to process life more out of their emotions or out of talking, whereas men tend to process it out of seeing. Sight is a big deal thing for a man. And because of the way a man's brain is wired, some images, sexual images in particular, create this thing going on inside their head. So what happens is that when a man sees something that he finds sexually attractive, there is a little thing that at the back part of his brain here, there's this thing called the nucleus, I keep forgetting the word, accumbens, nucleus accumbens that's back here, that when he sees something that's attractive to him sexually, it lights up and it shoots this little bit of pleasure into his brain, okay? And it's involuntary, it's biological, he can't do anything about it, it just happens, okay? So all of a sudden, this is what's happening. I think that's why the text is saying about Samson. He saw, all he does is see, and boom, get this little pleasure thing. But very quickly, this realization moves to the front of his brain, where there's a cortex, the front of his brain, where he then has this decision-making area where he's his choices and his will and so on, and he has to decide what's he going to do with this little bit of pleasure that he's just experienced. And he's got some choices, okay? If he's sitting at a restaurant with his girlfriend and he sees a pretty waitress go by, and then his eyes look over at his girlfriend, she's got two sharp objects in her hands. At that particular moment, his front of his brain says, your life's in danger, please stop this, okay? So he does that. But if he loves God, he's also going to say, God, I'm not going to go there. And if he wants to honor his marriage, he's going to do the same thing. But it happens automatically. So that's why you'll see guys, they smile and they go, no. They smile and they go, no. Like, it's just, that's the way they're doing. Their minds are just a really strange thing that's going on there. This is the way God made us. And for some of you, that might seem strange. It might seem odd. It might seem weird. Hey, it's true, okay? Personal testimony, it's true. And what happens here is that if God has made us that way, he's made us that way for a purpose. He's made us that way for a reason. I've told him sometimes I don't like this, but he hasn't changed me. You know what I'm saying? So what we need to do then is to understand that God is doing this, and we need to trust him. I think in our particular culture it's more difficult because there's a lot of stuff that in our culture is reserved inside the marriage bedroom that you can see on the line and in walking down the street and so on. And so men are constantly having to fight this, and they need to trust God. I believe his Spirit wants to help us. I believe he does that. Samson is not there. He doesn't want, he wants it, he deserves it, he can handle it, right? That's how he's speaking. So here's what we read again. One day Samson went to Gaza where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. He chose to then take what was happening in the back of his mind and play with it with his eyes, and then physically to go to bed with this woman. The people of Gaza were told, Samson's here. Samson's here. So here's what happens. So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, at dawn, we will kill him. When he wakes up in the morning, when he's about to leave, when the light, we can see him, we'll kill him at the gates. It appears they locked the gates, by the way. But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. Then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate together with the two posts and tore them loose. You understand what these gates are like, right? They're massive things, okay? They're huge, double gates. They are the protection sign of the city. They're massive things. He lifted them up to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. So he takes these things, throws them on his shoulders, goes up to the top of the hill nonetheless, and sticks them in the ground. It's absolutely stunning. And the people who are ready to trap him are not ready for him in the middle of the night. They see him doing this, and it must have freaked them out, okay, as they watch him accomplish this incredible, incredible thing. But I wonder if when he left the prostitute, if there would have been, I hope there would have been, some measure of guilt, that what he had done was to violate a commandment, a clear commandment of God. Did he? I wonder if when he got to the gates and realized they were locked and knew that he had to get out of the city, this is Philistine city, I wonder if when he got to the gates, if there wasn't a moment where he thought in his mind, I wonder if the power will be there. I wonder if the strength will be there. I wonder, and maybe tentatively, maybe nervously, he reaches out and puts his hands underneath the cross member of one of those gates. And then he feels the power inside of him, and he knows that the Spirit of God is filling him with that power, and he begins to shake the walls, shake the doors, and there's a splintering and a snapping of wood as he pulls it out of the ground and throws it on his shoulders. I wonder, because if he doesn't have any conviction, if he doesn't believe what he's done is wrong, if he thinks, you know what? God's still blessing me. It wasn't that bad. If he thinks that way, he's abusing the grace of God. He's believing that somehow he can violate God's command and be okay. Now, I want to say this to us. All of us need to hear this, okay? I need to hear this. You need to hear this. Every time we sin, there's a payment for that. It may not happen right away. It may not happen at that moment, but it will happen. And either you pay for it or God pays for it. See, God has come along in his grace and said, I'll pay for it. And that's why Jesus went to the cross, to pay the penalty for our sin. Our sin separates us from God. It produces death. Jesus goes to the cross and takes our sin on him and dies for our sin. Either I pay it in eternity or God pays for it. And I'm wondering, I think, in fact, that Samson is kind of like winking at what he did. He's kind of feeling, well, it couldn't have been that bad because I'm not experiencing pain. In fact, I actually feel pretty good. And look what I've just imagined to do. Look what I've just done. And so there is this elevated sense maybe in his life, I believe, where he's just thinking it's okay. I can get away with it. I feel better. It's all good. And so he goes in this direction and is in a very, very dangerous place. A very dangerous place. Samson abuses the grace of God. And I would ask you, you see, here's what happens to us, and we're going to see this in a minute too. It's not like suddenly Samson fell into bed with this prostitute, like it was an accident or something. This is something that has gotten him to this place because he has been, I think, abusing God's grace all along. Thinking, I can get away with it, I can do this, it's going to be okay. You don't fall into something suddenly. It's a slow thing where you begin to move step by step into disobeying God until you think, well, it's not that bad, it's okay, I can keep doing it, I'm not going to be in trouble, and on you go. And then you decide or discover that some of those key values that you held, you sacrificed, and there's a brokenness, and you're saying in your mind, if only, if only, if only. So he abuses the grace of God. Secondly, he assumes his disobedience won't cost him anything. He assumes his disobedience won't cost him anything. Here's what we read. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek. There's a pattern here, isn't there? Whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secrets of his great strength and how we can overpower him so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. Now, that was an incredible amount of money. 1,100 shekels of silver is like 140 pounds of silver. We don't know how many Philistine rulers there were, but multiply 140 by the number of rulers, and you can see the dollar signs in Delilah's eyes rotating around. This is a good idea. I like this. Let me make this happen. And so she does. And if you remember in the account, she goes to Samson. She presses Samson. She prods him a little bit. And he loves her, and he's been abusing the grace of God, so he thinks it's kind of maybe a safe place. So he says to her, if you tie me up with some leather straps, fresh leather straps, I will be weak like any normal man. And so she ties him up. She says, the Philistines are on you, and he snaps them like they're threads. Oh, Samson, you don't really love me, or you tell me the truth. So he says, okay, if you tie me up with brand new ropes, just tie me up with brand new ropes, and I will be like a normal person. So she ties him up with new ropes, and she says, the Philistines are on you, and boom, he breaks them all. Oh, Samson, you really don't love me. What's the truth? He says, and he's getting closer here now. He says this, you take the 7 braids in my hair, and you put them into a loom. You weave them into that loom, and I will become like an ordinary person. And so she does that, and she calls, the Philistines are on you, and he pulls his hair, shakes his head, and tears them away from the loom. And again, she's saying, oh, you don't really love me. In fact, she gets to this point. Then she said to him, how can you say, I love you, when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength. I'm going to read the next verse to you, okay? And this is a cool verse. Watch this. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. It's in the Bible, folks. I didn't write it, okay? Now, and I'm going to just move on from that verse. Here he is, and she has come at him a number of times. And so you remember what happens, right? I want her. I deserve her. I can handle this. I can handle this. And so he tells her the secret. I'm a Nazarite, you can't cut my hair. If you cut my hair, I'm going to be like an ordinary person. And so, here's what we read in the text. When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, come back once more. He has told me everything. So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. And after putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, Samson, The Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, took him down to Gaza, binding him with bronze shackles. They set him to grinding grain in the prison. And the verse that strikes me in this passage is this one. He did not know that the Lord had left him. The Lord has been with him for 40 years. The Lord is the one who's given him his strength. He did not know? How could he not know? He is the man who's been gifted in such special ways, but he did not know. Why did he not know? Why did he not know? He did not know because he does what we do. He takes these steps gradually, a little bit at a time, abuses the grace of God, disobeys, goes further down, until he is blind in his heart to the place and the position of God in his life. He did not know that God had left him. I want it. I deserve it. I can handle it. No, you can't. You can't. And I look at this man and my heart is so heavy. Isn't yours? When you look at what happened, you see such incredible potential and you realize that at the end of his life, he simply says, if only. If only, if only, if only. And my prayer for you and my prayer for me this morning is that if only would not be your mantra. Would not be what you say, if only I, if only I, if only I, that you will say, thank God. I blew it, but I got back quickly. I didn't go very far. I wanted to, and in fact, I did step over the line, but then I backed up and I said, God, I'm sorry. I didn't abuse the grace of God. I didn't believe my disobedience I would get away with it. I got right with God. And, one of the things that happens to me, I've been doing this pastor thing for a long time, and I'll get people who will come to me, who will come into to my office, and they're devastated, and they'll say things like, this part of my life, my marriage is messed up, my relationship with my kids is messed up, I'm into drugs, I'm overwhelmed by stuff, and on they'll go. And what they're really saying to me is, if only, if only, if only, if only. And what I want to say to you and to me is this, look, it's so important that we not go there. Samson's life is designed to teach us not to live like him, because this is the price, the penalty that you will end up paying. And if right now you're kind of playing around the edges and you're saying, I want that. I know God doesn't want it, but I want it. I deserve it. I've been faithful for so long. I've worked really hard. I've sacrificed my life. I've been faithful in my relationships. I think it's time for me just to step a little bit outside of that. Or if you're saying, you know what, I can handle it, I want to tell you, you can't. You can't. We stop right now. We turn around. We get right with God. We do that. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for a book that is open about the lives of its heroes. I thank you for the Bible that talks to us not just about the good things our heroes do, but opens up about the bad things and warns us. So today is maybe a shot across the bow for some of our lives to say to us, turn around, get right with God. Don't be blinded by your sin. Live right. Honor God. And I pray for people here this morning that, Lord, maybe there are some just 180s that need to take place, like completely turn around, go in the other direction. And if that's the case, I pray that you might speak to their hearts. Thank you for being such an awesome God. And bless today. In Jesus' name, amen.